When we were young, we read more often because we had to. It was the only way for us to get knowledge and to be enlightened. Read to your heart's delight and be enlightened. Let's just read. It's a podcast by Andy's Personal Development. Stay tuned for more reading and enlightenment. Hi, and welcome to this edition of Let's Just Read. We have another amazing and engaging episode for you. Remember our watchwords: read to your heart's delight, read for enlightenment, and for knowledge. This episode is entitled The Teacher Who Writes with Jeremy S. Adams. We're going to bring him on in a moment, but let me just tell you a bit about our guest based on his novel or his information rather that we have received. Now, he says the first thing you need to know about me is that I'm a teacher who writes versus a writer who teaches. We're going to ask him about that in a moment. He says, my students have always been my inspiration, and my books would be very different if not written through the lens of an educator who is deeply worried that our children have become disheartened about a country I love. That's amazing. To me, this does not feel like an abstract problem. A country without patriotism feels like a country that will wither. A wandering nation without a soul. That's deep, that's philosophical. He said, I've taught at one public high school at Bakersfield, California for over 25 years, and the same school my dad taught for over 20 years. Generational stuff. And the school where I met my wife and the school I graduated from, as did my four siblings. Wow, what a legacy, what a heritage. So, without further ado, let's introduce our guest, Jeremy S. Adams. Welcome, Jeremy.
Andy, thank you for the welcome, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. You make me sound more important than I am. Thank you so much.
It's so good to have you, my friend, and we appreciate your passion for obviously what you're doing, and we're glad to have you here. So, Jeremy, I see so much history, so much legacy in what we just read there about you and your family, your father, your wife, your siblings. That's all wonderful. But before all of that happened, before you even came into the sphere of thinking about writing, even as you became a teacher, could you remember who Jeremy S. Adams was?
Yeah, I know I was a very different person, I think, before I found the enchantment of books and reading and learning. I am an unapologetic romantic of books and learning. You might call me a bibliophile. I sympathize with Thomas Jefferson's quote that, essentially a room without books is like a body without a soul.
Yeah.
And I kind of think of my life in two places, in two parts. The first part
Hmm.
of my life was just kind of pure ambition, wanting to get to a good college and wanting to get a good job and make a lot of money and kind of fit into that very narrow definition of what we
Uh
call
huh.
success in America, right? But
Right.
then when I started to read, when I had these incredible professors in college, I began to realize that life is much richer than that. And through the written word, I realized that words and ideas can change the world, they can change individual lives. And essentially, what I realized was people don't even have to be alive for their words
Mm.
and their ideas to change me. And I would tell you, Andy, the most powerful realization I ever had in my whole life was when I was taking a class on the classics and I was reading Plato and I was reading Aristotle and de Tocqueville and Machiavelli. And I realized these people have been dead, but somehow their words are very alive to me.
Right.
You have that famous quote that the purpose of life is not merely to live, but to live well. And I wanted to know what it meant to live well. And books to me are the greatest slingshot to that meaningful life.
Wow, wonderful. You're very engaging, and I love your passion. Thank you, Jeremy. We appreciate that. What would you say was the greatest inspiration to your style of writing? I know you mentioned the great philosophers from a Greek anthology, but is there something much more definable, something much more personal, something much more home to you that inspired you into what you finally did as a writer?
I mean, that is such a wonderful question about prose and about style and what the inspiration is. I would say a few things about that. First of all, I have kind of a weird reading habit, which is that I'm
Hmm.
always reading two books at once. I'm always
Okay.
reading kind of a nonfiction book because I teach political science and economics for a living. So I'm always reading history books and political books, but I'm also always reading a novel. Sometimes it's a classic novel or a modern novel. And I think what's happened is, there's certain people who would tell you, Andy, that like you should really be clear in your writing, just be lucid, make sure there's clarity. And I don't agree with that. I think that you want to be clear, but I think there can also be a kind of a poetic power to
Mm,
your prose. I think that it's
yeah.
one thing, right? It's one thing to say something clearly. It's another thing
Hmm.
to say it clearly, but also powerfully. And
Right.
and I want there to be a kind of lyricism to my writing. I want there to be a punch. I want there to be an exclamation point. I want you to feel it not just in your brain, but also in the inner sanctum of your soul. And so I think kind of that love of poetry and of literature, I want to kind of transform that and bring it into the world of writing nonfiction, which is what I do. I wish I could be a novelist, but I'm not good enough to do that. But I definitely do love kind of bringing that kind of lyricism into the everyday kind of writing that I do. And last thing I'll say is, I mean, I think the goal of any writer, is for somebody to pick up something you're writing, either a book or an essay or whatever, and to say, oh, that's Jeremy S. Adams. I know who that is because there's a certain vitality, there's a certain voice that they've worked really hard to kind of, manicure in their writing style. And that's what I've aimed to do. I hope I've done it.
Yeah, I get you because I mean you are deep on poetry and philosophy, and that drives your style. You don't want to be perfect. You don't want to be totally lucid and clear, but you also want to be dynamic because,
Yeah.
as you said in your own words, you want to touch the soul of the individual who's reading, and resoundingly, they must come to a point to recognize, hey, this is Jeremy Adams. This is his style. This is his brand. This is his signature. I get it. I get it. I get it. So, what do you mean by the term the teacher who writes as opposed to the other way?
Yeah, I think what happens a lot is people consider themselves. You say, "Well, what's your job? What's your profession?" And they would say, "Well, I'm a professional writer." Well, as you know, and as I know well, sometimes writing doesn't pay particularly well, and so I think
Yep.
sometimes people will go get adjunct jobs at a college, or they'll say, "I'm going to go write. I'm going to go teach for a few years." That has never been kind of my professional orientation. My professional orientation has always been that I am a teacher, and I am anchored deep into the soil of my classroom and into my school. I was a teacher for 15 years before I ever really started writing. And what
Right.
happened, what happens typically, Andy, is that people who are teachers, about 15 years into your career, you typically make a big move. You go into administration, or you change schools, or you go help the union. I decided to do something much harder than all that, which was to have a second career as a professional writer. And what I realized was that teachers, and I'm sure your audience knows this, teachers are never going to be famous. We are never going to be rich, right? We're never going to live in mansions, but we do have one superpower, Andy. We have one superpower and only one, and that is that we see things happening in our classrooms before anybody else does, right? So we stand at this fascinating intersection of the economy, of parenting, of technology, of culture, of morality. So when things change, when we're like, oh, that's different, that's new, I haven't seen that before, we know it first. And what I realized was when I started writing about that, then all these places like the Washington Post or the LA Times, or publishers, there's a real audience for that. Because if you wait for the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or NBC News to start reporting on what's happening with your kids, it's already too late.
Yeah.
You're years behind. So,
Yeah.
the cell phone addiction, the anxiety, the loneliness, all these things that we talk about now, I was writing about that years ago when it was kind of edgy to talk about it. And so, so I'm a teacher. I mean, if I had to choose between writing forever or teaching forever, no question, it's teaching. But that
Teaching.
doesn't
Yeah.
but that doesn't
Yeah.
mean that I'm not passionate about my writing, and I
Uh-huh.
don't want it to be successful.
Yeah, yeah, I get it. I get it. When I think about teachers, one word comes to mind, Jeremy: influence. And I think that, and this is not a criticism but rather an observation. I think that teachers sometimes don't realize how powerful their influence is because, hey, you're with students, they're spending a certain level of time with you during the course of the day. That's important. Remember, whatever they take in during that time that you are with them, you are the one that's doing the teaching. They are the one that's supposed to be receiving the information. And therefore, the manner in which you digress that information has an impact on them. And however your personality rubs off, and then that's also some level of influence. I'm just saying that as a passing note, but I remember from my years of going to school and going to college that I always looked at the personality of the teacher before I thought about what they were saying. And maybe I was wrong in doing that, but at the end of the day, it was simply me looking for a connection with the teacher so that whatever they say to me, I'm going to consider more valuable as it aligns with my values as a student. And I know
I
you get that.
No, I know that is absolutely beautifully said, Andy, and I couldn't agree more because I think one of the things that like I believe that we have this era nowadays of teaching where so many teachers just kind of get on Chromebooks and computers and they just kind of do activities here and there. But to me, at the end of the day, if the teacher doesn't have passion for the subject that he or she is teaching, why should the student? And I that's why I always thought that teaching is very powerful if the teacher him or herself sees value in what it is they're teaching. And the other thing I would say is that your first point is so good, which is that you don't really know the impact you're going to have because students are going to remember you 10, 20, 30 years right after you've taught them, and the
Yeah,
way right and the way that they look at you 20 years later is going to be different than the way they look at you in the moment. And
that's
one of the
right.
things, when I give speeches and I talk to new teachers, I always say you want them to enjoy your class in the moment, but it's better for them to feel 20 years later that that person
Ah,
was somehow a fork in the road, was somehow
yes.
informed something about them. And
Yeah.
so, look at the long run. Don't worry about victories. Look at goals. The goal is for education to make a difference in your life. A victory happens every day, and hopefully you'll have those. But it's the goal and the magic of education that you're really aiming for.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well said. Appreciate that, Jeremy. Let's switch gears a bit. And I'm going to put up something on the screen that you are absolutely familiar with. And you're going to tell us what was the inspiration behind it. And also, why did you choose this as the cover? Lessons in Liberty. Tell us.
Yeah, I'll be perfectly honest, this is my magnum opus. This
Uh
is
huh.
really why I went into writing, was to write essentially this book. And this book essentially takes kind of two different forms of writing, which is two genres, kind of history and
Uh huh.
self-help, and brings them together, right? And,
Okay.
and,
Yeah.
and so, I've been teaching now, Andy, for 27 years. I know I look way too young for that, but I've been teaching for 27 years. And I will tell you, my friend, and I hope your audience really takes this seriously. In the last 7 or 8 years, the way that young people look at their own lives and the way they look at their country and their mental health, it is a crisis. Okay. We're not talking
Mm,
about, and that's why, you could call me a cranker or a curmudgeon and say, well, every generation thinks the next one's in trouble. No, 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 no. This is different. This is unique. And so the reason why I wanted to write this book is because when you look at some of the statistics are so alarming, so bad, you have to kind of take a second to take it in. But let me tell you something, right? To really understand why I wrote this book, I gotta explain this.
yeah.
50% of teenagers today say they don't enjoy their lives.
Uh huh.
50% say that they don't think their lives are important. And 1 out of 4 18 to 24-year-olds in this country have considered suicide. Something is very wrong in
Yeah.
our country,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's not just the adults and the kids. The adults are also unhappy. 30% are broadly dissatisfied with their lives. And so
Hmm.
I wanted to write a book that said, well, how can we take the lessons of our own country amazing human beings who, from the founding period to people who are still alive today, and
Yeah.
discern and kind of distill, well, how did they use their freedom well? Because, one of the lessons I teach to my students, Andy, is that we are living in this kind of rare moment of history where we're born free. We have freedom. It doesn't matter our race or our religion or our gender or any of it. We're free, but we don't know how to use our freedom in a meaningful way. And so
Mm.
the best way to learn is through example. And so we have these incredible people in our history, right? So many incredible people who they use their history, their liberty, to live a meaningful and purposeful life. And so the best way to learn is through example, is through a model.
Yeah.
And so I
Yeah.
take 10 incredible Americans, and I figured out, 3 life lessons that are very practical and actionable for how we can learn from them and live better lives today. So it's a very practical book, but hopefully it's a very inspirational book as well.
Yeah. Wonderful. What is, I'm going to just remove it for a moment. What is the feedback, Jeremy, that you have gotten from this publication in particular? What are people saying about it? Are they resonating with the message that you've put out there?
Yeah, I've been amazingly gratified
Uh
by
huh.
the kind of response I've gotten from people. And
Yeah.
the thing that they say that I didn't expect when the book was released, you never know, you're very nervous about what people are going to say, is that the book is a kind of a mixture of people who we've all heard of before. There's a chapter on Washington, on Lincoln and Jefferson, Teddy Roosevelt, right? So you have your Americans that everybody's heard of, but then you also have these other incredible men and women, people like Clara Barton, people like Daniel Inouye, people like Arthur Ashe, people like Ben Nighthorse Campbell, who a lot of people have not heard of. And the response is, Jeremy, why don't we know about these people? We should have been taught about these people because they are so incredible. They're so inspiring. They offer such great life lessons that we can use today. I should have learned about these people. And so I'm very, very excited that there's some of these names that should be in the stars. They should be spotlighted, right? They should be on the lips of every American, and they haven't been. And I'm
Yeah.
really, really excited that so many Americans are reading the book and saying, wow, I didn't know about Ben Nighthorse Campbell or Daniel Inouye. We should have national holidays after some of these people. They're so incredible. And so
Yeah.
I'm really
Yeah.
happy to be bringing that to the readers.
All right. Thank you for that, Jeremy. Have you had the pleasure of doing any live book talks where you interact with the audience and they feel the depth and the passion of what you're saying now about this particular publication?
I've done for my last book, Hollowed Out, which was kind of the thing that kind of put me on the map. Kind of, it was on 1 or 2 bestseller lists. It did really, really well. I did a few of them for Hollowed Out. I have not done any live. I've done a lot of interviews, but nothing like what you're describing for this book. I'd love to.
Okay. 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 Wonderful. What about a movie or a mini television series for any of your publications?
No, nothing like that. I would welcome it. That would be great. I actually think a mini series that kind of does a quick, a focus on each of the 10 would be great
All
because
right.
it's
All
right.
right.
It's very logical, right? 3 life lessons. Well, here's this person. Here's their 3 life lessons, and here's how it applies to you. I think it'd be very easy to organize because I do think it's very inspiring.
Wow. I want to read something here. The Secrets of Timeless Teachers Instruction that Works in Every Generation. You suggest that the methods, habits, and behaviors that constitute powerful teaching do not change over time. In fact, an effective and impactful teacher 100 years ago used many of the same habits and strategies a powerful teacher uses today. Tell us a bit about that. It sounds so intriguing.
Yeah, no, and I think it's actually kind of a controversial opinion. It's
Uh
kind of
huh.
edgy. I think nowadays when people hire teachers, they want to know: do you know the latest and the greatest? Do you know the technology? And I, and
Uh
I,
huh.
I and again, there's nothing wrong with technology. I use technology in my classroom, and there's nothing wrong with it.
Right.
I'm not a Luddite. I'm not against it. But but when you think back to the teachers who changed your life, who somehow were able to take the content and the curriculum and make it so real and so potent and so powerful, it is always rooted in a kind of relationship you have with the teacher, right? It's always related to a kind of the power of the personality of the classroom. It's never because of the computer that you're working on. It's never because of the video that you're watching. It's because there's a connection between the teacher and the student, that they both understand there's something vital going on here. And Andy, let me describe a moment for you that's it doesn't happen very often. In 27 years of teaching, as much as I would love to have this happen every day. It doesn't happen all that often, but once in a while, you will have a moment in a classroom where the teacher is not the teacher anymore, and the students are not the students anymore, and we're all just human beings, and we're talking about something so important, so vital, that it kind of melts away. And that this is a moment where you have an audience, and they're listening not because you're going to test them on it, not because you're in school, but because they understand that there's something so important about the idea or the content that it transforms the world around them, or it transforms them, or it slingshots them into a stratosphere of understanding that they've never had before. I think we all know what it's like to kind of have that flip in your life, where all of a sudden, you're one person before you read a book, and then all of a sudden you're a different person after you've read that book. That can happen in a classroom sometimes. And the thing that made Socrates a great teacher is the same thing that makes a great teacher today, which is the power of personality, a teacher who knows their content really well, who cares about his or her students, and has that powerful connection to young people in the belief that what we're doing here is transformative and should be.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. So I've just put up a picture of the secrets of timeless teachers so that folks can relate to what you're saying. In terms of your students and their feedback, what are they saying about your writing? Have they latched on to any particular publication per se?
Interesting question. Very interesting question. It's funny. When my first book came out, they thought it was the coolest thing in the world to have a teacher as a book. I mean, they thought it was the neatest thing in the world. And then a few years ago, when I had my first kind of big kind of bestseller thing, it's interesting because, Andy, what teenagers think are interesting and cool about writing has nothing to do with the book. They think they would think me right here being on this show, that's cool, right? Being on national TV, having being published somewhere, having a Google profile, like they think that that's the cool part. But the actual book itself, they don't care that much about it. And kind of last year's class, the Lessons in Liberty book that just came out, it came out during graduation week. So my students were totally distracted. And I don't think they cared that much about it. But, some of them do read the books. And frankly, this last book is for them. It's for young people and regular Americans who are trying to live a better life. And when they do read it, it's interesting because it's like they're sauntering in a different part of my life, and they kind of get my most intimate, honest thoughts that I'm not going to offer in class all the time. And so they think it's neat. But they think it's neat because there's a kind of element of fame or celebrity, not much, but there's a little bit. There's a little bit, and that's the part. That's the part they think is cool.
All right, I get it. Wow, interesting. So I'm just gonna put up. This is riding the wave: teacher strategies for navigating change and strengthening key relationships. Tell us a bit about this one, Jeremy.
Yeah, no, this one was a very, very practical book. And it's all about the fact that in education, we're constantly being asked to do new things. Every 2 years, we're asked to do new things and try innovative strategies and this and that. And one of the things that's happening is that's, I would argue, the number one thing that's really burning out teachers is we always put more on their plate. We never ask them. I mean, if all teachers had to do was teach, then it wouldn't be as hard of a job. But we are supposed to be parents sometimes. We're supposed to be friends sometimes. We're supposed to be counselors sometimes. We feed them, we clothe them, we counsel them. It goes on and on and on. And it's like a wave, and the waves get higher and higher and higher. And it's a book about, well, how do we, because Andy, when you're standing in the ocean and the wave is coming, you got two choices. Either you're gonna hunker down and it's gonna hurt you, or you're gonna ride the wave and it's gonna be fun. And it was all about how, in this really difficult era of teaching, I would tell you, I think this is the hardest era of teaching that's ever been. And it's gotten hard. I mean, and then in the last 10 years, it's gotten much harder. Two things have made modern teaching so difficult, where it's different now than it was before these two things. Obviously COVID, but really, I'll be honest, the cell phones. Having these phones has changed
Yeah.
everything about our students. Their attention span, their obsession, their distraction, their inability to do homework, their inability to kind of really dial into what's going on in the moment. Their mental health, I think, is tied to it. And so as teachers, we have to handle it. Like, we don't get to decide who our students are. We don't get to decide the society within which we teach. And so this book was about offering very practical ways of handling all the change coming our way in education. It actually, interestingly, it came out 2 weeks into COVID. So it was a very timely book about how to deal with changes in education.
Yeah. What you're alluding to is so extremely important. And listen, I have seen so many people struggle with the attention span that their children have, because it's really short. And you're right about the technology, the cell phones, the iPads, whatever. But I think in addition to that, Jeremy, the influx of the social media platforms and what they present and what they offer has a lot to play in the level of distraction that you get from students. In addition to that, if as teachers and as parents, we begin to deal with so much virtuous values in the home from day one, I think it's going to make a huge difference. I want to play something for you with a famous individual, and I want you to give me a feedback on what he's saying, because he's focusing on education and teaching, and he's looking at the disparity between AI and the natural stuff that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. Just take a look at this.
Education, it's a big challenge now. If we do not change the way we teach, 30 years later we'll be in trouble. Because the way we teach, the thing we teach our kids are the things the past 200 years is knowledge-based. And we cannot teach our kids to compete with machine who is smarter. We have to teach something unique. That is, machine can never catch up with us. Value, believing, independent thinking, teamwork, care for others. These are the soft part. The knowledge may not teach you that. Folks, that's why I think we should teach our kids sports, the music, painting, arts, but making sure a human should be different from everything we teach should be different from machine. If the machine can do better, you have to think about it.
Wow. Your comments.
I will tell you, I agree with about half of that.
Okay.
So I do believe, and I'll tell you right, this is really important. When he says knowledge doesn't matter, of course it matters. Knowledge matters. And I'll tell you right now, somebody, and I think that's Jack Ma, I think the richest man in China, something like that, right?
Yeah.
Here's the thing though, our students have to know things in order to appreciate the art he wants, or to create the music. And I'll tell you right now, and again, if you're not in the classroom, you probably don't appreciate this. A lot of our young people don't know, like, their knowledge base is so low. I mean, they don't know basic things about the world, right? I mean, a lot of students can't tell you the difference between a continent and a country and a state and a city, right? They don't know what photosynthesis is. They don't know. And here's the thing, they can't read. And when I say they can't read, they can read, but they don't have the attention span to read beyond 2 or 3 pages. Andy, they don't have the attention span to watch a movie. I mean, my students today will tell you they don't watch movies because they're too hard to watch. It takes it takes 90 minutes. I'm not going to do that. And so
Yeah.
knowledge, we've got to know things. Otherwise, the rest, like, that's where values come from. That's where inspiration comes from. And you're never going to be able to appreciate art and music and the humanities and the social sciences if you don't scaffold them upon on knowledge that is essential. So, I agree and I don't agree. I mean, I think what he's saying is there's a human element to education, and that's where we have,
Yeah. Yeah.
transcendent values and inspiration and beauty and the eternal fixtures of the human condition that a computer can't take the place of. I completely agree. But those come from reading things like the Sermon on the Mount or Aristotle's Politics or reading Tolstoy's War and Peace. And for those things, you do have to have knowledge and an attention span. So again, as somebody who teaches and is constantly shocked by how much our kids don't know, I would tell you that that knowledge, that core curriculum knowledge, is essential. They have to know things, and a lot of them just simply don't.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I love it. This is healthy and it's full of democracy. So
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Jeremy, do you have a challenge with your responsibility as a teacher, juggling that and what is called writer's block?
The thing about kind of my writing career is, the great thing about being a teacher who writes is that when I don't want to write, I don't write.
Okay. Okay.
And so to me, but the other great thing is I do have this muse, right? I have this kind of perpetual muse
Yeah.
of my students. So I'll tell you right now, I just alluded to it. And that is, like, I want to write an essay pretty soon about the fact that so many of our young people are growing up without the power of movies and film in their lives. I mean, I don't know about you, Andy, but I can quote for you, the movies that really moved me, that touched my soul, that gave me a sense of what my life could be when I was a teenager. Movies like A River Runs Through It, or a Dead Poets Society, or Field of
Yeah.
Dreams, or, I mean, it goes on and on and on. And I can't imagine growing up in a time where I wasn't watching things that inspired me to love, that didn't inspire me to try and be a good patriot, that didn't inspire me to try and be a good man, or what's the meaning of friendship and loss and faith, and, I mean, all the big things of the human condition. What Dostoevsky called the eternal questions. Movies are very good at asking you the eternal questions. Our young people don't have the answers; they don't know the questions, and that's because they don't consume art. Andy, I mean, think about this. I'm going to give you a very, very disturbing and upsetting statistic. In the 1970s, over 90% of American teenagers read for over 15 minutes a day. Maybe it was a newspaper article or a magazine or a book or whatever. Today, that number is under 15%. They just don't read. You are more likely to read a book when you're 13 years old in America than when you're 16 years old. And that's because the phone, I mean, you only have so much time. And when you are on your phone 8 or 9 hours a day, there's no room for the stories and the novels and the movies that we used to consume, that kind of inspired and informed us. So yeah, I mean, I can get writer's block, but there's enough stuff that I notice that kind of worries me and makes me anxious that I can write about it.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you for sharing, Jeremy. We appreciate that and we appreciate you. We are coming to the end of this episode and it has been really wonderful. What does the future look like with regards to the writing aspect of JeremySAdams?
I have no idea. It's kind of interesting because the book that just came out was published by a big 5 publisher, HarperCollins. It is the book that I've always wanted to write, and so I'm not exactly sure what where it's going to go. I mean, there are a lot of opinion pieces and essays that I want to write that I'm thinking about. As far as books, nothing right now. Who knows? But I really do believe in Lessons in Liberty. I really believe it's a book for our time, and I really believe it. The great thing about the book is you don't have to read it sequentially, right? You can read the introduction and a chapter on Teddy Roosevelt, or you could read the chapter on Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and I believe that it's the right book for the right time. So I'm kind of focused on that book right now, And, you know, I mean, the great thing about writing is it's not like being an athlete. You can get better at it and more successful at it the older you get.
Yeah.
You know, so that's essentially where I am.
Yeah. Good. Thank you for that. If you had the opportunity to say something to the entire world, you had this megaphone that could reach 8 billion persons. It's your last impactful statement. What would you say to them, Jeremy?
I would say that life, no matter what it is, life is a blessing and a gift. Doesn't matter if you have a religious worldview or not. Doesn't matter if you believe we're here because of a loving and living God or because we won the cosmic lottery ticket of existence. We're here and we're here now and we get this life. And the thing I would say is that life is a gift, but that doesn't mean that it's easy. And the beautiful thing about being alive is that when you approach life as a journey of awakening, of increasing richness, of increasing wisdom, the beautiful thing to realize is that we don't have to do it alone, that our problems have been encountered by millions of people before us, and there's no reason to go through this life without sharing in the enchanting wisdom of others. And that's why I'm a teacher. That's why I love books. That's why I believe words and ideas can change the world. So life is a gift, but sometimes we need somebody to give us a shovel so we can start digging.
What an amazing and philosophical note to end the episode on. I have an audience, no comments. I think they are so enthralled in what you've been saying. And in addition to that, I have a thumbs up. Somebody just loves or like what you're saying. So, Jeremy, I'm going to put the information up here that I believe can help. But you tell them which is the most effective way in which they can make contact with you and where they can get copies of your publications.
Yeah, no, any of the books are available on Amazon or
Mhm.
barnesandnoble.com. The latest book for sure, Lessons in Liberty, should be at your local Barnes and Noble. I am, you know, I'm on Twitter or X, you called it, at JeremySAdams6. I'm also on Instagram, JeremySAdams1976. And then I have a website where you can write me an email or a note, and that is www.JeremySAdamsauthor.com. And I'd love to hear from readers, especially if it's positive. I like those the most. That's the most. It's not always, but usually it is. So I love to hear from readers.
Yeah, that wasn't the right one that I put up there, was it?
You know, I didn't look that closely, if I'm being honest.
Oh my goodness. No, that wasn't the right one. Okay. So we have come to the end of this amazing episode with Jeremy S. Adams. He is the teacher who writes, and he has 5 publications out, and it has been an amazing experience being with him live here on Let's Just Read. So I think I'm gonna hold on a second there. Let me see if I got this information. No, I'm going to put it out in the show notes so that people can know exactly where to make contact with you, Jeremy. I apologize for that on behalf of me and my people. So, we have come to the end, and it has been a wonderful and engaging episode. As we leave, people, just remember, read to your heart's delight. Read for knowledge, read for enlightenment, read for information. This is Andy Charles, your host, together with my guest, Jeremy S. Adams, and we're saying so long, Godspeed, God bless. Until next time, take care. Bye for now.